Last time, I made a video discussing the Traveler's sibling and how their fate and destiny could potentially have been written out of history. But today, I'm tackling the second alternative to the question, who is the Abyss sibling? What if instead of the sibling being rewritten, the sibling was inserted into the Traveler's life? A whole 180 from the previous theory. What if the Abyss sibling was never their sibling at all? Alright, time to put on your tinfoil hats because we are going straight into the deep end. I'll be making a few disclaimers before I give you the rundown. This video is not indicative of any final product, and this theory is one of many alternatives to the situation. There is never a definitive answer for this question, and anyone that tells you that their answer is correct is probably lying to you. I will also be using Lumine as my Abyss sibling for the simplicity of pronouns and because I really hate saying Abyss sibling over and over again. Anyway, let's begin. For a brief rationale and background of how this entire theory came to be, the question, who is the Abyss sibling, spurred after the questionable discussion with Nahida after the events of the Sumeru Archon Quest Act 5. I went over the discussion in full detail in a previous video, but it all summarizes into 3 hypotheses. Number 1 is that the Abyss sibling has records of themselves in the Irminsul, while the Traveler doesn't because the Traveler is not from this world. 2 is that the Abyss sibling is not listed by the Fatui as a dissenter, or an entity that was originally not from this world. Number 3 is that the Abyss siblings' journey began after the Cataclysm, and along the journey, their fates were unreadable and inaccessible by Nahida. So today, we will consider the possibility that these hypotheses are correct and accurate, instead of disproving them, which only raises a question of, what can Lumine really be? So let's dive into one of many possible theories. This theory posits that Lumine is a Khaenriah copy created by the alchemists using the Art of Khemia. The purpose of Lumine's creation and her insertion into Aether's memories is to become a means of pacifying the Outlander, as well as to study Aether's genetic components like his elemental adaptability and flight to somehow weaponize and duplicate it in the form of Lumine. Yeah, that's a lot. So let's break that down into several core assumptions. Number 1 is that Lumine is a copy of Aether's powers and is a byproduct of extensive research from the alchemists using the Art of Khemia. Number 2 is that Lumine being integrated into the Traveler as their sibling is motivated by pacifying the Traveler as a safety precaution. Number 3 is that Aether's memories have been tampered with. And number 4 is that Lumine's journey after the Cataclysm was to recover the Homeland. This theory has several merits and groundings that help its case. First is the means of creation. There are 3 components in Lumine that would need to be addressed for this to work. 1 is appearance, 2 is powers, and 3 is kinship. Lumine being a homunculus is actually pretty plausible given what we know about the scientific capabilities of Khaenriah. Khaenrians have been tampering with homunculi creations even before the Cataclysm. We know this much because Albedo required perfecting. The Art of Khemia is a potential form of forbidden knowledge that has entity creation as one of its many faculties. As far as we are concerned in the current lore, it is hinted that Gold's creations are mostly from the Art of Khemia, and even Albedo hints that the art supersedes the generic method of creating organic life by imbuing life into something else. This would explain the slight differences in Aether and Lumine's designs despite being noted as twins. Granted, twins aren't always identical, and this may have been a stylistic choice. Copying an entity's appearance, though in lore, is easy enough, so there is no problem with that. This could also potentially explain why both Aether and Lumine have clothes that have Khaenriah primogems as a motif, when they're not supposed to be from this world. Not to mention, creating bodies with another external source of energy isn't unheard of in Tevat. For example, the Raiden puppets were imbued with electro capabilities by the Raiden Shogun, meaning that the Traveler's powers could potentially be replicated with enough technological knowledge. But the biggest question here is the potential for altering Aether's memories. The biggest hurdle is that Aether is not affected by the Irminsul or the traditional rules of Tevat. This is why it's difficult to argue if Khaenriah has any technology that could corrupt the person's memories outside of the Irminsul. Well, for this to work, we need to address something outside of that tree and maybe something more powerful. We know that by this point, the creation of Durin and the Rifthounds are currently underway, given that this is prior to the Cataclysm. For Aether's memories to be augmented, they would need to be altered by an abyssal or celestial entity, something much stronger than the Irminsul given their extraterrestrial entities. We know that certain gods can manipulate time and space, so who is to say that there's no abyssal counterpart given we've seen them be able to corrupt the person's mind? But again, this theory assumes that first, the Traveler is even able to be affected by those two, and second is that Khaenriah has access to that kind of power. But I digress. The question is, why would they want to replicate the Traveler and make him think he has a sibling? Well, I can think of multiple reasons. One is that if Lumine was created by the sages of Khaenriah, it would be with the motivation of studying the Traveler. Creating a simulacrum of an alien would be a really big feat in science. Two is because if they're able to control that alien into believing it has connections to this world, and if they can somehow manipulate its perception of trust to benefit them, then it's an instant pacification. Theoretically, of course. Albedo makes a correct assumption during his story quest about the relationship of the Traveler and the world. There's nothing saying that they're compatible, and that could be what Khaenriah is assuming. If they found a mysterious yet powerful extraterrestrial creature land on their kingdom, or anywhere even close to it, there's no guarantee that it's friendly when it wakes up. But containing it or keeping it sedated in a box would be unfortunately wasting the Traveler's power and potential. So why not make it believe that one of its family is friendly with the people of Khaenriah? It would also explain why Aether and Lumine have different waking periods, or why Lumine didn't prioritize waking Aether up. The Traveler being purposefully sedated by the Khaenrians would be a great explanation why they only woke up when Khaenriah itself was already falling apart. But now that I've stated the potential and benefits of this theory, it's time to put it to the test. This theory is plausible, but highly unlikely for several reasons. One is that the Sustainer, as far as we are aware given that this is a Traveler's point of view, calls them both Outlanders. Similarly, the fact that they both have the same power sets assumes that Khaenriah succeeded in duplicating the Traveler's powers, which is a very, very difficult feat. Number two is that the problem with this theory is that it assumes that the Traveler landed in Khaenriah, or was even found by the Khaenrians in the first place. It also assumes that the citizens of Khaenriah are also influenced by the brother-sister dynamic, given that the Abyss Mage and Lector calls Aether Lumine's brother. However, this can be disproven if the Lumine project was a super secret project that only the higher-ups in Khaenriah know about, but I digress. We do need to keep that in mind that several other Abyss folks call Aether Lumine's brother. Number three is that this also assumes that the Irminsul is correct, that the Fatui information is correct, and that Nahida isn't wrong. This is a really, really big problem given how we now have clear examples of the Irminsul being a fallible source. Additionally, any piece of canon is a fallible source. But number four is that, if this is the case, why do both Lumine and Aether have descriptions in their character releases about their world? Unless that is to assume that these descriptions are set in respect to their availability as travelers, it doesn't make sense for both of them to have the description if both of them aren't from the same place. But since they are both meant to be travelers, it won't make sense for only one of them to have a description of their old world if both of them are seen as canon travelers in context to the game. Therefore, this point is also questionable. Now, closing off this video, here's my personal thoughts on this theory. I don't subscribe to this theory, despite the substance it can provide to current holes in the story, even if I've gone out of my way to prove it. It doesn't sit right with me that the Abyss Sibling is an inorganic creation and that the Traveler's mind was manipulated for the sole reason of downplaying the story's stakes. The reason the Traveler's story is so important is because the Traveler is constantly fighting with that mentality of finding their sibling despite all the odds in the story, and despite their connections with the Abyss. If the story gives the Traveler an undeserved and sudden exit from this dilemma, then we lose that branch of potential story for any moral conflict. The moment the Traveler finds out the truth that their sibling is nothing short of a Khaenriah creation, it's not impossible for them to question their memories instead of questioning their sibling's motive. Because that's not their sibling anymore. The stakes stop becoming personal to the Traveler's connections and instead becomes a Traveler versus Khaenriah story. While that's not necessarily a bad thing, that's not my personal cup of tea, and I'd really rather that the Abyss Sibling has always been their sibling since the very beginning. Provides more angst, honestly, like just the angst potential of it is just really, really good, rather than it's nothing more than just a facade, a tapestry of lies. I really wish that Lumine and Aether were actual siblings even before this entire story, for the sole reason that I think it just hits so much harder. And it just gives you a reason to care for the Abyss Sibling. The moment that that connection is erased, given that we know almost nothing about the Abyss Sibling, that's when we lose a character altogether. Anyway, That's part 2 of the Who is the Abyss Sibling series. A much more critical thinking video rather than a theorizing one, for the sole reason that I wanted to show you guys that not all theories are made equal. I love the critiquing side of theory making just as much as the creation. And honestly, as a research student in college, it's normal to debunk your own work. This is just how I roll most of the time. I usually just have a theory, and I always think about a way to debunk it. Anyway, my name is Haster, and thank you for chilling with me.